parables of Jesus largely out of the book of Matthew over the last few weeks, and we'll look at a little bit outside of Matthew toward the end of class. We are kind of continuing on this this one. So the end of last week, the last one that we went over was the one with the wedding feast, which was, it kind of prompted some discussion about that one because it's a little bit of a couple things to it. First of all, it was obviously a big statement toward the Pharisees in particular, who were the ones that essentially were being told, you're not ready or you're not in a position where you're able to be the ones to actually listen and hear this message, when you look at what the real meaning was behind it. And so instead, you're being cast out, and we're going to go find new replacement guests. And yet the replacement guests were mostly fine once they finally showed up. A lot of them gave excuses and everything. When they finally get to the group that's willing to just come in, they still had one who came in and just came in as though there was no need to do anything about it and ill-prepared. And the idea was it's not like you just get to waltz in, essentially, but there is something still expected of those who come to that wedding feast. And I think that's something it makes sense to us, that, the invitation is now open to anyone. But the invitation isn't just to come in and live as though you weren't at a wedding feast. And obviously the wedding feast being there in presence of God, being there as the invited guest into his home. And what he wants out of us is that following, just that idea that we're going to be followers of him, doing what he asks us to do. And so when that was said, as you read on in that chapter, then he goes on and he talks to the Pharisees about how right after he tells them the kingdom of heaven has been given over to others, their first response then is to try to trap him in his words. And they do this over and over with several different questions that they're going to lobby against him. Well, what about paying taxes to Caesar? And they always do this by kind of puffing him up a little bit, and they think they'll get him to talk if they praise him just a little bit. We know you know what's right. Teacher, we know you're a great teacher, and all this stuff. And their idea and their motivation was quite ill behind it, in an attempt to try to trap him in his words. Then the Sadducees come in. After the Pharisees didn't really have much success with the paying taxes to Caesar question, they come in and say, okay, what about marriage at the resurrection? Let's say, let's come up with all these different what-if situations that they don't believe in anyway, just to see what he's going to say to try to put him into the Sadducees cannot follow you. They're trying to find ways in which they can trap him in any which way. Of course, he's able to completely shut them down as well. And then they come and say, all right, what's the greatest commandment? And he's able to obviously teach them even more each time. And then he turns around and asks them a question that they needed to answer, but were unwilling to, when he asked them whose son the Messiah was. And he follows it up then with an entire chapter's worth of warnings to the people against the Pharisees and to beware of that hypocrisy. And then he goes on even more and he talks all these woes against them. Because they just don't see what they're missing it. He's been teaching them in parables, but they don't see and they're not hearing. Their ears are closed. Their eyes are, darkened to the message of this. And they're just not grasping. And if they are, they're unwilling to hear it and really hear it for what it's saying to them. Which brings us up into Matthew chapter 24. Now learn this lesson from the fig tree. As soon as its twigs get tender and its leaves come out, you know that summer is near. Even so, when you see all these things, you know that it is near, right at the door. And think about, we may not have fig trees, but think about every other sign that we have that we know, when winter's about to end. Sometimes, you get the false hope of the crocus that come up and way too early every time. It's like, well, that one's not going to live. Or the daffodils that always end up with snow on them. But then when we get certain ones, and you start to see the green leaves on the trees, and you start to see the budding of plants that are more of your late spring and summer plants, we know at that point we've made it out of the colder weather, we're into the warmer season, the growing season's here. We see all of those signs. He says, okay, you know that. So whether it's the fig tree or insert whatever one pops into your head, when you see that, you know that summer is near. Even so, when you see all these things, and he's talking about all these things that he just kind of said, we're going to, all these woes to the Pharisees and all this stuff, you know that it is near, right at the door. Truly, I tell you, this generation will certainly not pass away until all these things have happened. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. Now, the problem that happens right there is he does kind of have two different thoughts in those two different verses. Do you see that? What's verse 34 talking about? The one that says, this generation will certainly not pass away until all these things have happened. It's talking about the present time that he's talking to and all the things that he has just said are going to happen regarding the Pharisees and all of that and all of these things. And then he goes on and makes an even broader statement and says, heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never. Talking about the importance of his word. He doesn't then turn around and say, heaven and earth will pass away during this generation. And the unfortunate thing is to try to link those things up. Some people have then interpreted this and that and come up with a lot of different things in the Matthew 24 and 25 both into what is about to happen during this time and what's going to happen in the future and trying to link up each verse with whether it's later, whether it's now and all of this, and it gets to be a bit of a challenge. But in the midst of all of this, let's not lose sight of what he's telling them about. He's telling them about the fact that after all of these teachings, just be aware of the hypocrisy of these leaders that are of your people that are trying to lead you into the wrong words. My words. That's really what it came back down to. You watched every bit of them trying to trap me. You watched them trying to trip me up. You watched them unwilling to answer my questions. I'm showing you their hypocrisy. I'm telling you that they're no longer the invited wedding guests and all of this. So listen now, my words stand. Heaven and earth is going to go away. My words are what keep lingering. And all these things I just explained to you, they're going to happen during your lifetime. All these things about the Pharisees and how everything that they had going for them is going to be taken away from them. And we see that happen within that generation's time. But then he also says, the reason I'm telling you all of this is because of that. So, again, during that generation, what was going to happen were the woes that were pronounced to the Pharisees and all of those things that had just been talked about. If you pull this particular verse out and you miss some of the ones prior to that and the chapters leading up to it, you kind of miss what this was really going on. The teachers of the law and the Pharisees, things like chapter 23, verse 13 says, woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites. You shut the door of the kingdom of heaven in people's faces. You yourselves do not enter, nor will you let those enter who are trying to. And he's all these woes and all of this. And he talks about that. You snakes, you brood of vipers, how will you escape being condemned to hell? All of these things that he's talking about to that group, you're going to watch it happen. You're going to watch every single thing that they do. And with eyes open now to their hypocrisy, beware of the leaven of the teachings that they give, and watch for their hypocrisy, and understand that they're no longer the invited wedding guests. They're the ones that when everything was entrusted to them, and that unmerciful servant then turns around and murders everyone, including the son. All of these things you're going to see, and he's planting this thought in their mind of watch all of these things. These things are all going to happen within that generation. But the one thing that will not change is what I'm telling you and my words. And so you see how that differs. So again, that's why he says his words will never pass away. The significance of that is he's trying to teach them this concept and this idea of what? What is the whole purpose of what he's trying to get through in these last few parables? Specifically to the ones that are talking about the Pharisees, talking about the leaders of the Jewish people versus where he gets up to now when he says this budding fig tree tells you summer's almost here. What is he getting at? Any? I'll help you out if no one's willing to talk. Quiet group this morning. All right. So the idea there is that what he's really trying to drive home is this point that while these things that are going on with the Pharisees, with the ones that are currently in a position where they should be the ones most receptive to it, during their lifetime, they're going to watch the unraveling of what the faith of the ones they once looked up to as the pillars of the faith of their religious community. So you're going to watch it happen where everything is going to expose them of their hypocrisy and of their lack of ability to actually put faith in God. But instead, they hold to their traditions. They come up with exact things. Watch it. Watch all this. They themselves can't even enter in, and they won't let anyone else try to enter. They're going to hold their place at the door and try to kick people out. Watch all of this. He says all of that's going to happen, but then remember what I'm telling you when I'm gone, because what they may not have reflected back to and that what he is was go all the way back to when he had just told them, back about prior to even the wedding feast, when he talked about the son being killed as the master of the house, being killed by those tenants and the wicked tenants that did it. And remember, the Pharisees themselves and that group were even the ones that cried out, you should completely kick those tenants out and get new tenants that aren't willing to, that aren't going to take advantage of something that's not even their own. It's like, yeah, remember that. Remember that, because my words are true on this one. All right, and then we go on into verse 36. But about that day or hour, no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. As it was in the days of Noah, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. All right, so whether or not he's talking about the actions will be like that, what do we know about the days of Noah? There's one verse that to me is the most astounding verse of a description of humankind that you'll ever read, and it's right before the flood. Do you remember what it says? I know, Doug, you know. Yeah. Every inclination and thought of man was only evil all the time. There was nothing redeemable about them. They were so far gone. I don't know if that's what that's talking about. But what I think it is talking about is what were they doing during that time? Going about their life as though nothing was going to be a problem. I think the evil there, whether it reaches the level of the days of Noah or not, I don't know that we could ever hit a point, maybe I hope, we never can hit a point of that evil, that there's literally nothing but evil going through their minds. We see that with maybe some people, but everybody, it was excessive during that time. We may not hit that level of evil, but the idea of what were they doing? They were living their lives as though nothing was going to harm them, as though there was no problem going on. They're going about their lives as though they were unstoppable, they were unbreakable, and that they were just going to continue to move along doing whatever it is that they wanted to do. What happens to them? Well, we know. Obviously, the flood comes and destroys them. And he says, about the day and hour, no one knows. All right, he has said, in the prior verse, what was verse 35? Go back and just read that real quick. Yeah, heaven and earth. I skipped past it. Why am I missing that one? I don't think I have it in there, do I? Oh, it's there. I didn't put the right numbers at the top. That's what was throwing me off. I was reading the top numbers. Heaven and earth will pass away. All right, so he says, heaven and earth will pass away, but about that day and hour. Talking about that, he's still on that line of thinking. Heaven and earth are going to pass away, but about that day and hour, no one knows. So this isn't anything that we're going to be able to predict. We're not going to know exactly. And I remember watching when I was a kid, I thought it was a local thing when I lived in Detroit, but it turns out he's a guy that's over like on TV and all these different places. I remember distinctly a guy, and I won't use his name just to bash the guy, but you've probably seen somebody very similar. If not, he holds up this, I don't even know what this is. There's an envelope here. He holds this up, and it's whatever you call those things, like a newspaper front page kind of a thing. He's holding it up. And headlines, that's what I'm thinking of. He holds up the headlines, and he's reading it, and he's like, see, we're in the last days. He'll do this. This is 1990, probably 1998. No, earlier than that, 1989. Get my numbers backed up. Back in 1989, he's predicting that this is going to be the end of the times. We're right at it. It's going to be in the next couple of years, predicting it. He is still on TV doing that to this day. I'm like, does nobody want to call him out on this? Like, am I the only one hearing these things are wrong? We do not know that. We're not going to. Nor does the Son, nor do the angels in heaven, but only the Father. As it was in the days of Noah. We'll be just going about our days, and our world will just be going about as though everything's fine when the Son of Man shows up. For in the days before the flood, people were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, up to the day Noah entered the ark. They did not change anything in the days leading up to that. And they knew nothing about what would happen until the flood came and took them all away. That is how it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. Those who know nothing about God will know nothing about its coming. There's not going to be this alarming shockwave of events that says, all right, we're 4 months away, we're 3 months away, we're 2 months away, we're a month away. This countdown mentality that people are searching for is misguided and misled, because we're not going to know. It's this thief in the night doesn't give you a countdown of which night it's going to be. This idea of we can know he's coming because he's told us he's coming again. And the events that we try to latch to, it could be latched to any generation if we're going to misread Scripture. Because again, I've seen back again, why did that all happen in the 80s, I guess? But I remember standing in Washington, D.C. on the National Mall in the mid-80s with a guy wearing a placard on there who listed off American presidents and was convinced that Clinton was the Antichrist. And that he was just like the one before, which he went all the way back to, I think JFK, was like JFK come back as now Clinton. And he had this whole thing, and he's wearing this huge sign, walking around, spreading this message of, well, what is he doing now? I just wonder, I want to find that guy and be like, so back in the 80s, when you were spreading this message, have you rethought anything? Because we have this way of wanting to know these things. Yeah.
Just as Noah preached during all this time up to the point that he went into the ark, we are here preaching the good news also that Christ is coming, but we don't know the day. Noah didn't know the day the flood was going to come exactly either.
Yeah, I remember one time, probably one of the more memorable middle school classes, or no, it was maybe probably a high school class. I just remember having this conversation where it really kind of dawned on me. So one of the guys who was teaching said, literally, Jesus could come right now. But he didn't, but he could come right now. And that's the idea. We never know exactly when. That we have to live our lives preaching the word, spreading that, getting the message out, which is what we're to do. When the world's going about their lives as though nothing's changing, nothing's impending doom or anything like that, but yet we have the message of salvation that can help them move from impending doom to impending glory. And yet they don't hear it, they don't see it, and they'll never hear it and see it if we don't do our job, which is give that message of hope. And unfortunately, what do you see a lot of times as the message being delivered regarding the end of the world now? Events, countdowns. That's not the message of the end of the world. What's the message of the end of the world? Be on Jesus' team. That's the message. The message should never be about the when. It's about the who do you want to be when it happens. And that's really the message that we need to be about spreading and sending out to people, is not constantly trying to come up with a way to scare people into submission because the day is almost here, or people who are prone to worry, get them all in a tizzy, worried that they're about to be left behind, and those kinds of things. About the days and hours, no one knows, not even the angels, not even somebody on Facebook, turns out, on this one. Yeah. Yeah. There's really, what else can we do? I mean, we can prepare and we can try to get as many other people around us prepared. That's about where the extent of our abilities lie, right? Because if we go beyond that, we're second guessing or trying to put words into God's mouth as though we know the day and the hour. I'm pretty sure Jesus said he doesn't even know. And if he is unaware of that he's going to come when God says, okay, now go. That when that's his time to go, God knows the right time that he's going to send him, but he has this patience of wanting that no one should perish. He's giving us time to reach more and more people, and at some point in time, he'll know that we've hit the point where it's now time. He knows that. The angels don't. The angels are just ministering spirits. The Son doesn't. The Son can't do anything until the Father tells him to. And so we're not going to have this secret knowledge and secret understanding of it, despite what a lot of people want to kind of interject into that. 2 men will be in the field, one will be taken and the other left. 2 women will be grinding with a handmill, one will be taken and the other left. What is this a description of? When he returns. Again, this is not some other event. And this is what is so, for so many people, it's so easy to try to, like, one gets snatched away and then all these other events will then transpire. No, that's not, because, when we look at this and we go back and we try to, place this, what event is he specifically talking about? The return of Christ, in the sense of the judgment. It wasn't a snatching away of a smaller number of them in some way, which you'd think would be talked about at some point in time with upfront clarity, if that was really and truly what was going to happen. Not, well, if you read this verse and you couple it with this one, you could kind of see where maybe that might happen. You'd think if this was that big of a theological event to take place in our, our future spiritual lives, that it would get mentioned directly, right? I mean, it just seems like that's too big of a thing to gloss over, that we would have some event that some people have named it with a rapture, that some people are going to be snatched away with another lengthy period of time, when no other place in Scripture do we see anything that even alleges anything remotely close to that. Actually, we see other places where the description is, he returns, period. And what is this snatching away? We'll read 1 Thessalonians. How do people get taken? Well, the dead go first, and those who are still living are lifted up to meet him in the air. 2 men are in a field. One's taken, the other one's left. 2 women are grinding. One's taken. You see, that's what he's describing. He's not describing a different event. He's describing the same event of how going about their business, only those he has chosen because of their faithful following of him, doing what he's asked of them, waiting for him to a return, are the ones that get brought up to him. So again, how does this sometimes get misinterpreted? Well, I kind of told you one of them, but how does this apply when we look at our recent study of the book of Revelation? What was the key thing about Revelation that was really, truly, probably the most critical passage type thing of all of that when you look at the timing of the events of that? Do you remember? Right. So how did we know that's who it was? There was a phrase that was used many, many times in the early part of the book. Shortly to pass. And that idea as though there were events that were taking place during that generation. And then later, after this really long period of Jesus reigning, he returns for his people. And we see this long time period that we live in, and that we kind of see when the timeline of that fits with who is in that book. And then we put even that into it. There's just this whole missing idea in Scripture about any other multiple taking ups, of happening. Well, I'll grab this group, then things are going to get really bad, so watch out. And then second chances, and then here's another group. That's not the way it's ever really been described. He actually never comes back to earth. He only comes back to meet us in the air. It's the only place. He's reigning in his kingdom, and he brings us to his eternal kingdom. And so when we look at all this, he says, and you try to predict it, the day and the hour, we don't know when. I don't even know when, is what Jesus is saying. You're not going to know. The whole world will be going about their own business as though everything's just fine, and then it's going to happen. Literally, you may not drive completely home today before it happens. It's the thought of how we need to be living our lives in a way that ask yourself really and truly this kind of question, because this is what he was posing to them as well. If his return, which he wasn't asking them in that direct sense because he hadn't even gone through everything, but he's planting this thought in their head about this waiting and looking for it. Now put into our context, where we're now in the process and in the phase of waiting for that return. Are we ready if he comes back today? Are we living our lives in a way that if he comes back within the next hour, we're good with that? Are we good? And I mean that are we living a life that is aligned with him, waiting on him, with that walking in step with the Spirit kind of way that we're looking at during the worship hours? Is that the way? I mean, that's the kind of questions I think that we have to look at, is knowing that in the days of Noah, they didn't even know what was about to happen. We do know a little bit about what's going to happen. Whether it's about to happen or will happen in a year, 75 years, 7,500 years is irrelevant to how we live our lives. Because we only get our lives too. We don't even know that while the world may continue on, that we'll make it home before the end of the day today. So those are the kinds of things that we have to constantly be living in a way of, whether it's our time or all of our time is up. That are we living a life that allows us to be aligned with him so that when he does return, or when our time is up here and we are returned to him, are we ready to have that judgment? And I think that's a question that he wants them to be thinking about, because the Pharisees were saying they're not letting people in and out. They're standing at the door. Woe to them. They're on a path toward hell and don't even see what they're doing, is basically what he said when he calls them snakes and brood of vipers. They're there. They don't even know what they're doing is so wrong. Introspectively, what are we doing? Are we welcoming? Are we reaching out? Are we doing what we're supposed to be doing as we prepare, as we, give that word to those around us? All right. Continuing on. Therefore, keep watch, because you do not know on what day your Lord will come. To me, that seems pretty cut and dry. For everyone, that's one of those verses you want to kind of, like slide across the desk to that guy on TV. Like, hold on, we got some breaking news here. You do not know. Okay. That article you're holding up has nothing to do with the book of Revelation. Just move on. It's like this idea that it's sometimes you watch these, you think it's frustrating because we want so badly to have the answer. We want so badly to predict these things. There are entire religious organizations that are built around things that have already come and gone, and yet they still exist because they keep moving the target date. I don't know if you know all of the history of certain denominations, but there are certain groups that they entirely built their entire religious lives around a date that has already come and gone. And now they're trying to reshuffle it and recalculate it and all that. We will not know the day on which our Lord comes. But understand this, if the owner of the house had known at what time of the night the thief was coming, he would have kept watch, and he would not have let his house be broken into. So what do? Stay up every single night watching, basically. That's the idea, is that we're constantly on alert and ready, watching and waiting for his return. Not in a sense that we're afraid of it, but in a way that we want to be as prepared as possible. The idea of the thief in the night, I think for the world is the right analogy. For us, sometimes it sounds scarier than when he returns. It'll be a time of joy and elation and celebration because of what he's bringing us home to. And if he finds us waiting for him, that's what he wants to find us. He wants us to be eagerly awaiting his coming. Yeah. The idea of him coming within the hour, is that an excitement, or does it spook you? And that's the idea. We need to be excited. I mean, we need to be in a position. We need to be in line with him in such a way that if we got 30 minutes heads up notice, that would be the most giddy, probably the right word, 30 minutes of our entire existence. Of just knowing, we're 30 minutes. He's going to be here in 30 minutes. Like the excitement of it. I remember being as a kid waiting for, your grandparents were coming over to your house. They lived about 25 minutes. When they told us they were leaving to come over, and it'd be 25 minutes away, we'd watch. Sure enough, they'd hit traffic, and it'd be 40 minutes or whatever. But still, the excitement of they were coming to our house. We'd go to theirs a lot, but they'd rarely come to ours. And so when they came, it was like, ooh, it's so exciting. They'd come out to our house. And so it was just that kind of kid-like excitement of being that opportunity to be home where you want to be. That's what we need to be having. That's what he wants us to be watching. And he says, and he uses that analogy of if the guy who lost everything because it was stolen from him had known what night they were coming, he would have been ready. If you're going to have everything taken from you if you're not ready, then be ready. That's what he wants them to know. Just be waiting. Be ready for him. So you also must be ready, because the Son of Man will come at an hour when you do not expect him. And, I think it's an amazing thought to think that, first of all, that he is coming back, and that he could come back at any moment in time. And that is a hard concept for us to wrap our mind around on this one. So how do we live so that we're ready? What does that look like? What does readiness really look like? Yeah. Yeah, you have to have given your life to him. And that idea of not having really truly submitted to him is a scary place to be, because then you're solely relying on whether or not his grace will cover that. When he gave you the assurance, it's like, okay, do what he said, and not, my hope, personal hope, is that more people than I think are going to be there. I would love that. But if there's people that are on the, you always, every time we come into March, there's always those teams that are on the bubble, it was called those teams that may or may not make it into the big tournament in March and all that. And wouldn't you rather know you're going to be in it rather than waiting till that selection day to find out? You're certain to be in there. But if we're knowing that we're going to be in, that's a lot better than not knowing and hoping, because some get disappointed, right? And so that's the thing, is you just don't want to be on that. So that's one. What's another way for us to be ready? How does that look?
Hearing his word and doing what it says.
Yeah.
In your life.
That idea of being sober-minded, and just knowing that where you're looking at, how do I, with just an even kilter look, how do I please him? What do I need to do to live my life the way he wants me to live? That kind of readiness. Okay, so another answer to this, he follows this up with another parable. He says, "Who then is faithful and wise servant, whom the master has put in charge of the servants in his household to give them their food at the proper time? It will be good for that servant whose master finds him doing so when he returns." It is that faithful living. It's that idea of doing the things he's asked you to do. So that's who it is that he finds to be the faithful one. "Truly, I tell you, he will put him in charge of all his possessions. But suppose that servant is wicked and says to himself, 'My master's staying away a long time,' and he begins to beat his fellow servants and eat and drink with drunkards and do whatever he wants to do. Live his life the way he would have to live his life, because I got time. Time's on my side here." And all of a sudden, this, I don't know when he's coming back, turns into he's back. And, we've all seen the movies where the kids decide to throw a party while the parents are gone, and the rapid attempt to try to clean the house up and cover up all everything. I think there's even kids' books about that, with like Cat in the Hat, all that. This from the time kids are little, they're basically taught this idea that if you clean up fast enough, no one will ever know what you did. We get no time. The door just opens, and there he is, waiting for. That's the kind of, like, are we living a life ready for that door just to fling open and be like, "I'm back. Are you ready for me?" That's the kind of living that he wants us to have. The master of that servant will come in on a day when he does not expect him, and at an hour he is not aware of. He will cut him to pieces and assign him a place with the hypocrites, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. I think the word hypocrite thrown in there is no surprise. Remember, he's been talking about who these hypocrites are. And he's saying the same way they're going to be cast out, someone who tries to be a servant of his but won't live in a life that matches up with that of faithful living, also kind of cast out in that same way. And so again, we should live our lives in a way that an unannounced coming doesn't catch us off guard, unprepared, in a state that we don't want to be found in. And by that, I don't mean Iowa. That's another state. But in the state that we don't want to be found, I almost said Nebraska, but I knew that Zach would get offended by that one. So the idea, though, is the state of what we are doing is where we, that's not what, we don't want to be found in a position or in a way of living that doesn't match up with what he would want us to have. It's a dedication to faithful living at all times of your life, not knowing when his return will be. Okay, so that was that parable. On a completely separate thing, so Ella had me take her to the gym last night. And so while I'm at the gym, they always have one of the channels up there that has this loop of kind of acted out Bible stories, like really well made movie quality stuff. Now they take some artistic license on sometimes the ordering of events or whatever. So I'm like, I'll watch a little bit of this one while I'm on the bike. So I plug into the thing and I'm listening to it, and it's about a parable. I was like, oh, perfect. One that we already had talked about. Well, they kind of mixed it up. They put the parable of the nets in with the calling of the fishers of men, with Simon, Peter, and the sons of Zebedee, and they kind of mixed up the exact events on all that. But it got me thinking, so that's all that really mattered. I wasn't trying to actually do an exegesis of the of the actual presentation there. But the idea was they're taking multiple Bible stories and kind of wrapped them into one storyline on this movie, which is all it was. But this was the one that we looked at. Once again, the kingdom of heaven is like a net that was let down into the lake and caught all kinds of fish. When it was full, the fishermen pulled it up on the shore, and then they sat down and collected the good fish in baskets, but threw the bad away. And then it continues, this is how it will be at the end of the age. the angels will come and separate the wicked from the righteous and throw them into a blazing furnace. There will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Well, where my mind went on this was another event of a miraculous catch of fish, and the sense of, this idea of these, not just a net being brought down, but a net being brought down and really hauling in quite a bit of this. And this takes place in John chapter 21. When Jesus had already been crucified and he's appearing to his disciples. Afterward, Jesus appeared again to his disciples by the Sea of Galilee. It happened this way. Simon Peter, Thomas, also known as Didymus, Nathanael from Cana, who's also known as Bartholomew, the sons of Zebedee, and two other disciples were together. And so they're out there on the boat. Or right before that, then Simon Peter says, I'm going out to fish. He told them, and they said, we'll go with you. So they went out and got in the boat. But that night they caught nothing. So now they're all out in the boat. And as they're out there early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples did not realize it was Jesus. They just see somebody over there standing on the shore. He called to them, friends, haven't you any fish? No, they answered. He said, throw your net on the right side of the boat, and you'll find some. When they did, they were unable to haul the net in because of the large number of fish. And when the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, it is the Lord, as soon as Simon Peter heard him say, it is the Lord, he wrapped his outer garment around him, for he'd taken it off, and jumped into the water. The other disciples followed in the boat, towing the net full of fish, for they were not far from the shore, about 100 yards. So Simon Peter just gets out and just runs in. Swims, runs, I don't know how deep it was exactly at that point, but somehow he gets that 100 yards back in. And they're hauling this huge amount of fish in the nets that are coming in. When they landed, they saw a fire of burning coals there with fish on it and some bread. Jesus said to them, bring some of the fish you have just caught. So Simon Peter climbed back into the boat and dragged the net ashore. It was full of large fish, 153. But even with so many, the net was not torn, which a little bit of miracles going on there left and right, that they weren't tearing the net. That there's 153 large fish and not just a random selection of fish where they would have to then sort them out. And this is the part that I thought where my mind went to. Well, normally when we think of the net being cast down, it's the casting good fish, bad fish, good fish, bad fish. In this one, it's 153 large fish. And I started wondering myself, and this is just a wondering, do you think any of those were bad fish? I bet they weren't in my mind, because Jesus in this miracle on there, there's no discussion about, like, go find a good fish out of that group of them. It was large fish, 153 of them, and they're all being brought in, and I don't know where my mind exactly goes with this other than the fact that you think that their mind went back to that parable, that when he has them going there, when he told them, like, at the end of the times, you're going to be bringing in, large numbers of fish. When he called them, what did he tell them? I'll make you what? Fishers of men. And I think here now Jesus is giving them one more reminder. Cast your net out on the right side and bring them in. Right side sounds like correct side to us. Understand that wouldn't have made sense in their language. So it wasn't that word. It was really just that side. Follow what I'm telling you to do. Cast your net out. In this case, it was the right side. And pull in a lot. And the nets will hold it. And this idea of watching his parables, that he gave this meaning to them, planted a thought in their head, get kind of drawn back up to the surface, so to speak, literally in this case. That he's bringing them to this understanding of, I told you this one already. And he doesn't have to say anything more to them about that. He doesn't say, does this remind you of anything I told you about? But it had to have. Because they were the ones that would have been there hearing that parable told to them just weeks before about how the fish getting brought in, they separated away. But when Jesus tells them to go, it seems as though it's all good fish. Because Jesus is going to harvest the good. And he said, I will make you into fishers of men. And then they get bigger, good fish. You kind of see like the way of thinking. And maybe I'm a little off base on that one. I was in the middle of an exercise bike. And that's where my mind went on that one. I was like, I've got to add that into the end of these there. Because it goes on, he says, Jesus said to them, come and have breakfast. None of the disciples dared ask him, who are you? They knew it was the Lord. Jesus came, took the bread and gave it to them, and he did the same with the fish. Now this was the third time Jesus appeared to his disciples, and after to his disciples after he was raised from the dead. And I think there's something interesting about it. They're not quite to the point where they're tasked with things on the day of Pentecost. They have not yet seen that culmination of things take place. And there they are. They're fishers. They're at the lake. I'm going to go catch fish. And they catch nothing. All night, catching nothing. I tell you what, I'm not meant to be a fisher, just so you know. I can do it, and I've done it. But if I go about 10 straight minutes without catching anything, I'm like, well, they're not biting today. I'm good. I'm done. I do not understand the all day waiting to try to catch a fish thing. That is just not in my nature. I can't even imagine with a net dragging it through the lake over and over again. Nothing. Well, I need to probably borrow yours because I don't see it. But this idea that there was nothing caught, and then he tells them, all right, do it one more time, this time on the other side. And all the fish, all the best fish they could possibly get. The message he sends to them in so many of these things, whether it's through events, whether it's through parables, or sometimes just astounding little messages on there. That's all I had on that. Anybody have any kind of closing thoughts they want to throw out there regarding that? So the takeaway really from the parables today, obviously, is preparedness and readiness. I mean, that is the thing, because reminding ourselves what he said when the net's gathered up, if there's good and bad fish kind of gathered, it's good, bad. Good. There will be a separation. There will be a separation of those thrown with the hypocrites, those who are welcomed home. We need to live our lives so that when the net's pulled up on us, that we're found to be good fish, that we're found to be that follower of his. Like whatever parable you want to grab and look at it, he tells us over and over and over again. Yeah.
I was just sitting here thinking, you mentioned that they've been out, and Scripture says they've been out fishing all night. I'm with you, I'm not a fisherman, but all night, I'm tired. I'm hangry.
Yeah.
To be truthful. And, I can just imagine myself in those shoes saying, I don't want to throw my net on the other side. That's not what I want to do. I don't care who you are.
Yeah.
And they had not realized that it was the Lord at the point. But they obeyed. They did it no matter how they felt. Their physical feelings didn't come into consideration. They just obeyed. And I think that's a point that I have to put to myself, and maybe others too. It doesn't matter how I feel physically or mentally or what I feel doesn't matter. It's obeying the Lord, period. And that's when he will be glorified.
I think it's important too, because that's a really easy excuse for us to draw up on many, many times, whether it's an age thing, whether it's while we're younger and we're super busy thing. It doesn't really matter. We can always come up with a reason of why we're too tired to serve the Lord, why we're too, it just doesn't fit in. I just can't. I just need some rest. I need to take the day off. We come up with whatever the reasoning is. Those are not things that we read about in Scripture. It's our Sabbath rest is still awaiting us in heaven. We have a long, long Sabbath rest. We got a good break ahead of us. Now is not the time for sitting back and breaking. Now is the time to accomplish the work that he wants us to do, to be ready, to be on guard, to watch through the night, those kinds of things, which aren't necessarily the easiest things to do. The easiest thing to do is what the world does. Go about their normal life, pretending nothing's happening. La, 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 I'm not going to pretend there's an end of the world ever coming. That kind of, but that's not what he wants out of us, right? So, all right, yeah.
I think some people take the attitude of, like the weatherman predicts that we're going to have 11 inches. And it doesn't come out. And the next time he said, well, should we believe him this time?
Yeah.
Well, we know with God it's going to be true.
Yeah.
And we just need to be up there. It's a little-
Roy, how much snow did you have at your house? Yeah, it hit parts of the area. You live up north, don't you? You guys didn't get it. All right. No, I know what you're saying. No, it's funny you say that, because it's funny. I live that. I know that. I know that exact part, because there is a certain amount of, if whether it's the letting down of the nets and you're don't catch it, but this time you will. You kind of. But when God says it, when God's behind it, we have to fully believe. Yeah. maybe that's the video that they're showing on this loop, for all I know. Maybe we're looking at the same one on there, but because you describe it very similar to what I saw there, so maybe that's what it is. But. All right, well, we will wrap things up there for this week. Next week, we'll continue on. We still have some more parables to get through. We have not gotten to some of the other parables that are only found in some of the other Gospels. A lot of these are repeated throughout, so there's several that we will not be going back over, but there's still a handful more that we'll be going through in the next week or two. So have a great week.